Okay, Boker Tov to everybody, and today's class will be a little shorter because we're in the midst of a wonderful project of midst of a wonderful Passover project, and that's why it's kind of hectic around here at Chabad. But we do not want to miss our Sunday morning Torah class, so we're doing this, and but it will most likely be a little shorter, unless I forget where I am. Yeah, that's the story. Okay, so first we always start with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya bidvaro. Very good. So the title of this class is Matzah, Why So Expensive? So I want to take a moment to discuss something very important. Let me close the shading because I think it's affecting the video quality. Okay, so I want to take a moment here to discuss the matzah and its deeper insight, deeper meaning. Why is it so important? So let me tell you a couple of things about matzah. Some I'm sure you know, and some I think you don't know. So the Torah tells us that we're getting ready for Passover. The Torah tells us that Shivas Yomim Matzos Tochelu. For 7 days you shall eat matzah. The Torah also tells us Be'erev Tochlu Matzahs, that on the evening you should eat matzah. So which one is it? Is it 7 days? Is it 1 day? In the evening. So here, let me tell you a couple of interesting things about matzah. Matzah is the only food in the kosher diet that we have today, which is not only forbidden. Let me back up. Chametz, which is leavened bread, and matzah, which is unleavened bread, is essentially the same ingredients, correct? Both are made of water and flour. The difference is one is allowed to rise and one not. If you ever went to a bakery, and I was planning to open up this class with a little video of an authentic, bakery, but again, because of limitation of time, there's a lot going on over here, we got straight into it. So chametz, which means leavened bread, same ingredient as matzah, but chametz is where the matzah is where the dough rises, either because it has yeast or because it naturally rises. And matzah, same ingredients, doesn't rise. Okay? In fact, let me show you something. I have a pen over here. Where's a pen? Bear with me over here as I get a pen and as I get a piece of paper. Let me take here a little piece of scrap paper, and let me show you. Okay? You with me? Especially for those who are expert in and remember their Hebrew school teaching. So I'm going to write down over here the word matzah in big. Matzah. Okay? That's a little confusing. Next. Okay. Matzah and chametz. Okay? Let me write this down. If you look at this paper, right? You see? Right here, is it clear? Chametz and matzah. Chametz and matzah. Why is this giving me a problem with the connection? My apologies. I don't know why it's doing this. You're going to have a pause. It'll be a pause for about 10 seconds. Stay with me. Don't go away. Okay. We're back. So chametz and matzah, both are, if you have two of the three letters are the same letters. Mem and tzadik, mem and the tzadik are there both in chametz and in matzah. The difference is that the chametz has a chet, okay, the chet over here, which is a letter that's sort of closed on the top, whereas matzah has the hey, a very similar letter to the chet. It just has an opening here by this little piece here. There's a little opening here. If you remember what the hey looks like, it's kind of a little difficult to describe here as I'm sitting here on the camera. So chametz, matzah, same letters basically. The only difference is one has a chet and one has a hey. A chet and a hey, if you remember from Hebrew school, give us a thumbs up if you remember your Hebrew letters from Hebrew school, that the chametz, the chet, is closed on the top. The matzah has a hey, that's the only different letter, and it's opened on the top. What is the significance? What does this mean? So let's delve a little further over here. so that you could be prepared for the Passover Seder with excitement, with meaning, something that you have to share with yourself and with your family, to make your Seder more meaningful, not just the time to get together and have brisket and some bitter herbs, and but let's make it more meaningful. And we're starting today, and we'll continue next week, God willing. So, the chametz, leavened bread, is the most prohibited food in the Torah. The most prohibited. And what do I mean by that? In fact, what might be a surprise to some of you is that chametz on Passover, leavened bread on Passover, is more prohibited than pig. Okay, than pork. How so? Pork, the prohibition in the Torah for us to eat pork is exactly that. It is forbidden to eat pork. There is no prohibition to own pork. There's no prohibition to derive any pleasure from pork. Okay? Chametz. Now, there's another food that's actually even more, also more severe than pork, which is milk and meat. So if you have a McDonald's burger, cheeseburger, that was cooked together, not only are you not, the Torah says, not only are you not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to have any pleasure, you're not allowed to cook it. Okay? So there are certain foods that are more prohibited than pork. Chametz, leavened bread, not only are you not allowed to eat it, says in the Torah, not only are you not allowed to have any benefit from it, which there are benefits you could have from food which are beyond eating. Feed it to your pet, for example. I remember hearing from one of my teachers. Today everybody is super sensitive for various different things. You always have to be very careful to be politically correct. Maybe not. Maybe it's time for us not to be politically correct. But before you start throwing eggs on the screen, we'll leave it at that. So, I remember one of my teachers, was a very prominent rabbi in New York, said he got a call once from a person inquiring from the rabbi some laws of Passover, and the person asks him questions about what's forbidden on Pesach and so on. Pesach meaning Passover. And then the person continues to ask the following question. Rabbi, can I feed my dog chametz? Can I feed my dog leavened products on Passover? Meat that might have bread mixed inside or whatever it is. And the rabbi said, of course not. Forbidden. Tarnished. Not allowed. So the person says to the rabbi the following, says, Rabbi, that means you're saying my dog is Jewish, and they hang up the phone. So for all of us who love our pets, which I do, just telling you this story. So on Pesach, you're not allowed to not only eat leavened bread, what you might not know is you're not allowed to own, you're not allowed to derive any pleasure, and it's not allowed to be in your possession if it's yours. There is no other food on the Jewish diet today that the prohibition is that you can't even own it. It doesn't exist. So on the one hand, chametz is the most prohibited food. We go crazy. That's where spring cleaning came from. We go meshuggah. We go crazy. We go into every corner. We clean. We make sure, as it says in the code of Jewish law, it's become the custom that anything that might have touched chametz, we rub down. We go crazy, which is where spring cleaning came from, I suppose. I mean, I'm not like a Gresa historian, but I'm assuming. I mean, this is it. You go crazy for weeks. I spoke to my mother like a week ago already. She says, did you start cleaning for Pesach? Usually people start cleaning already before. All because you cannot have any leavened bread or anything of that nature. Okay. Now, on the other hand, matzah is the only food in today's day and age. What I mean today's day and age, meaning in the diaspora after the destruction of the temple, it's the only food that it is an actual mitzvah to eat this food. There's no other food that God Almighty, our Creator, and the one who sustains us and gives us life on this wonderful day that we're enjoying right now. There is no other food that the Torah says, I want you to eat this food. Not sushi, and not gefilte fish, and not potato kugel, and not cholent. There is a mitzvah to have a festive meal on the holiday. There's a mitzvah to enjoy the Shabbat. But what should be on the menu does not say in the Torah. It doesn't say in the Torah you should have. It says you should have meat, by the way, on the holiday. Yes, I must say. But exactly, specifically what kind and so on, details, it doesn't say. Matzah is the only food. It's the only food that the Torah says, I command you that on the night of Passover, you have to eat this food. So let's discuss that, because it seems such a contrast. It's the same ingredient. Even the words, as I mentioned before, chametz, matzah, have the same letters, and the one letter that's different is very close. And why such opposing directives from God Almighty? Chametz is the biggest no-no. Matzah, the biggest yes, eat matzah. Now, why do we eat matzah? So the Torah tells us why we eat matzah. Because matzah reminds us of the fact that when it came time to leave Egypt, we had to rush out of there. We were chased out. The hand of God was so dominant that the Egyptians, even though they totally refused to allow us to leave, it was such an open miracle and force of God that was present that we had to rush out of Egypt. Okay, that's one of the main reasons for matzah, as we say, that we had no time. So it's of course a way of reliving that part of history. We're human beings; we relate to physical experiences. So by eating the matzah, we are meant to remember, number one, the poor man's bread that our fathers, our ancestors, fathers and mothers, our ancestors, matriarchs and patriarchs ate in Egypt. That's one reason, and also that we rushed out of Egypt. But I want to give you here a little bit of a deeper insight, which, again, some of you might have heard, but it's that time of the year. And so you appreciate the deeper understanding of matzah. And then maybe some technicalities to answer our first question of why matzah is so expensive. Let's pose this question. How many challah, which is leavened bread that you eat every Shabbat, you'd like to have challah, how many challahs could you put into one box? Probably one. How many matzahs could you put into one box? Many. 10. Right? So many of our holy commentators tell us the following. Challah represents inflated ego, rising. When one rises, when one has an unchecked absorbance, too much self-absorbed, egotistical. That's what challah. That's what leavened bread represents. Not challah. I got to be a little careful, and that's a discussion we could have, but not for now. But leavened bread represents inflated ego, unhealthy ego, arrogance. And that's why you could fit maybe one challah in a box, because when you are egotistical, or you walk into the room when someone has an unchecked ego, there's really room for just one person. There's no room for anybody else. They take up all the space. And of course, there are degrees to how severe this is. Matzah represents humility. That's what matzah represents. It's flat. And that's why there's room for many matzahs in a box. Because when you're humble, not only is there room, but the humility sort of causes this negative pressure of feeling others welcome and invited and comfortable. Which, interestingly enough, we start to say there, and we say whoever's hungry should come and join us, because that's what humility brings about. Humility is this like pulling the pump to pull in the air. That negative positive vacuum invites. And that's what humility does. So God says the following. Let me step aside. Let me deviate it just a little bit. The Zohar, the famous, the mystical Bible of Judaism, says that matzah, and to use the Aramaic that the Zohar says that matzah has two qualities. Matzah is called mechla de es asvasa, and it's called mechla de mehimenusa. What does that mean? It means that matzah is called food of healing and food of faith. And they go together because, and especially now we're slowly getting out of the COVID pandemic, God willing, it should be hastened and quicker and everybody should be well. Humility, faith, and healing go hand in hand. Humility, from a Torah perspective, means that you introduce God into your life, that you recognize and realize that you're not the end all. There's only so much that you could do. And on the other hand, you have to do the best that you can do, but you have to introduce and understand and believe that there's a greater power. That's what true humility is. Recognizing not false humility that I'm a nobody. You're not a nobody. You have to have self-importance in order to fulfill your purpose and mission. But you recognize that these things are a gift from God, and you were given these things so that you should use those gifts. And if your gift is that you could sing well, you should give that to others in a way that brings them joy, happiness, meaning, and so on. If your gift is that you are good you have various talents, music, you're smart, you got to use those talents. But you always must introduce and make sure that there is humility over there. Because, and this is why the Torah says on Passover that you have to take a week and work on getting rid of any unhealthy, any destructive ego. Which is why, to explain why the chametz, the chet, the opening is down. Because when you have an uninflated ego, there's nowhere to go, just down. You're not going to accept constructive criticism. You're Mr. Perfect. And the only place to go is down. Whereas as the matzah, the same letter, but has a hey, there's an opening. Because when you have humility, there's an opening to go up, to get better. So this is somewhat the deeper understanding of the difference between matzah and chametz. Because of this, throughout history, we have gone, just like in the negative, we've gone so meshuggah to go ahead and to get rid of chametz. We've also put in so much effort and energy to do the mitzvah of matzah, the only food that God says this is on the menu that you have to have. We've gone out of the norm, and way out of the norm, to do it in the best, most beautiful, most meticulous, perfect way as possible. And that has expressed itself in the fact that we try on Pesach night to get what's called matzah shmura, guarded matzah, which is that we try to use matzah that was guarded. The kernels of wheat are guarded from harvesting. Technically, halachically, it's really a problem if the wheat comes with into water once it's made into flour, because at that point it could start to rise and ferment. But there's no biblical problem with if you take just grain, and if the grain came in contact with water, fine. But we're extra careful. That's what calls matzah shmura. Guarded matzah means that it is guarded from any contact with water. In fact, they make sure that the day that they harvest the grain, they go out to the fields, that it hasn't rained and it's totally dry. It's a sunny day, it hasn't rained for a couple of days, is that the grain is totally dry. That's the extra matzah shmura. And number two, because the matzah has to be made for the sake of the mitzvah, there are many who are very careful not to use machine-made matzah, because machines don't have a mind to make the matzah for the sake of the mitzvah. So what we do is we use hand-baked matzah. So the matzah we have here that Chabad of Coral Springs this year is distributing with the goal of reaching a minimum of 1,000 homes here in Coral Springs to give matzah. I don't have the matzah box with me over here, but it's a beautiful, beautiful box. And you're welcome and encouraged to not only take matzah for yourself, but to take so for a friend, etc. So the matzah, for that reason, is a lot more expensive because it's handmade, not machine-made. So there's a lot of labor involved. There are those who go out to the fields and guard and make sure that it's not wet. It's just a process, is a greater process. And therefore, one of the reasons, and also, as a kid, I used to go before Pesach in New York, I used to go to the Matzah bakery because of the special mitzvah. My stepdad used to was part of a group, and the Matzah bakery would allow us to rent out the bakery, and we would bake the matzah ourselves. And I could tell you that a lot of extra expenses goes in when you do it in that way, because we would stand and rub the sticks, the kneading for the dough by ourselves. I would stand and we would wash the wash basin so no leftover flours from one 18-minute cycle to the next 18-minute cycle. There was a lot of individual hand work that went into producing that perfect matzah. So that is one of the reasons why matzah is more expensive. And I want to say something that's important for you to remember. So listen to this so that you could do it right. You could do it right. Because as I said before, matzah, the Zohar says, is food of faith and food of healing. Because when we introduce God into our life, because of our humility, and we say there's a greater power, rather than it's all me, then you introduce faith, and then you're a vehicle, you're a vessel to receive God's blessing and God's healing. So the Zohar says that when you're ingesting matzah, just like when you take food, you eat food, you're ingesting vitamin A and C and D and whatever it is, right? And then the enzymes and whatever else you might be ingesting, says the Zohar and elaborate in Chassidus, that when you're eating matzah on Passover, you're actually recharging, you're energizing your soul. Just like the matzah has physical components, it has spiritual energies within that matzah. When you eat the matzah, you're actually enhancing your faith and thus also bringing a blessing for healing. So it's so important, but it only happens not when you eat the matzah because it tastes good, but when you eat the matzah and you're doing the mitzvah with the matzah. So what does that mean? What that means is the following. The biblical mitzvah of eating matzah is the first night of Passover after dark. The rest of Pesach, if you decide you don't want to eat anything, there's no obligation to eat matzah. You're prohibited of eating chametz throughout Passover, but there's no obligation to actually eat matzah per se. But matzah, to fulfill the obligation, there's a couple of things that you need to know. Pay attention to this so that you could do it right, so that you could first and foremost fulfill God's mitzvah of the only food that He says, I want you to eat this. Oh yeah, you could die. You could be a vegetarian. You could be a veganarian. You could be alle Sachen. You could be a dietitian. All fine and good. But once a year, night of Passover, I give you a mitzvah. Have some carbs. Have some matzah. You're obligated, because God loves us and He knows the benefits of matzah and the experience of Passover. Now, a couple of things that I want to say. In order to fulfill the obligation of matzah, it has to be matzah. Not everything that is sold as matzah is the biblical valid matzah, fulfilling the mitzvah. For example, chocolate-covered matzah is not matzah for that sake. In order to fulfill the obligation of matzah, it has to be what Torah calls matzah, which is a mix of flour and water. It has to be unsalted. It cannot be onion matzah. It cannot be egg matzah. It cannot be chocolate-covered matzah and all the other exciting things. You could eat that. You could eat it. If it's kosher for Passover, you could eat it and enjoy. But you cannot fulfill the obligation of matzah with that kind of matzah. It's like a cake. It's like a cookie. It's all fine, delicious, and wonderful. But it's not the mitzvah of matzah. Remember that. There's no difference that if I tell you that in order to send an email to Jack, it is jack@google.com, and you decide to say, no, what's wrong with doing jack@google, comma. Yeah, comma on the bottom and a com. Who cares? It's just a little extra. It just won't get there. It won't make the connection. You have to do the mitzvah as God tells us to. Okay? That's number one. Number two, in order to fulfill the mitzvah, the Torah says you got to eat. And there's what's called a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that was passed down from Moses at Sinai, that there's a certain measurement that constitutes called eating. That's relevant to Yom Kippur when we fast. It's relevant to any time we have an obligation to eat something. We need to eat at least a kazayit. Kazayit literally means like the size of a large olive. And there's a lot of discussion in halachic discussion. Jews, two Jews, three opinions. A lot of discussion what that means. But to fulfill your obligation, if you're talking about the round matzahs, you probably should eat a little bit more than a third in order to fulfill the obligation without interruption. In other words, you can't take water, you can't eat it with salt. Pure matzah with nothing else, not with your gefilte fish, not with your chicken or your egg salad or whatever it might be. You have to have matzah without diluting it with anything else in your mouth. Later on, you can have matzah with whatever you want, but to fulfill the obligation you need, and to make the bracha ala chilat matzah, you need to have a point in time that you eat the matzah only, without talking, without this, just having the matzah after you make the blessing from beginning to end. A little bit more than a third, preferably a half if you can. Number 3, also very important. And this has become more important in the last, 10 years, I don't know how many years ago, where they changed the clock with daylight savings time, and where now it gets dark much later. The obligation, like everything in Judaism, has laws and regulations. The obligation of eating matzah on the first night of Passover, which this year is exactly in 2 weeks, Saturday night, from last night 2 weeks, it has to be after dark. So if you have family and you want the kinderlach to go to sleep, etc., and you're starting the Seder early, fine and dandy. But in order to fulfill the matzah obligation, you have to eat it after dark. So if you're going to have a drink and you're going to have your brisket, you're going to have whatever before, although I recommend very much to have it after, but if for whatever reason you start your meal and you have it before, you have to make sure to fulfill this mitzvah of matzah after dark, which is somewhere around these days, probably around, 8:15, 8:20, now that the clock has changed. You cannot fulfill your obligation before because it's not biblically the time for it. It has to be not only after sunset, but after dark, after 3 stars come out, and that's in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So this is very important to share. I know it's a little rushed, but please share this class with others. Thank you for listening. Again, this year we are doing Matzah 1K, as I mentioned before. We're also doing Seder Kit to Go, which will include, at no charge, there is a suggested donation if you want to donate, but there is no charge. There's the Seder Kit to Go, which will include a very beautiful sort of kit for Seder, which will allow you to have whatever you need for the Seder. I mean, it doesn't include the meal, but it includes all the Seder plate, plus a Haggadah, plus a guide, plus plastic cups for the 4 cups, etc., etc. And you're welcome to go online, order it, and it will be really our pleasure to share that with you, or if you know someone else who is in need of that. I think that covers it. And if you have any questions about Passover, you're welcome. You're welcome to reach out. It will be our pleasure. And we're also having a public Seder, by the way, in the courtyard. Hopefully, weather permitting. If it's going to be really hot, we'll probably go into the large room that we have so that we can have social distance. We have really a nice, large, air-conditioned room for those who have been to Chabad. The plan is to try to do it outdoors in our beautiful courtyard. Again, because of COVID concerns, we do have a Seder, and there is no charge for the Seder. Again, there's a suggested donation, but there's no charge. So if you're struggling and you don't have where to go for the Seder, you have 2 options. You have an option of either joining us for the first night, or you could take a Seder kit to go. I recommend that you join us if you can, so that you get a little bit more of a meaningful Seder experience. And of course, we want you not only to come by and take the special handmade shmura matzah for yourself, but we also have the project where we ask people to take 10 boxes and help deliver to reach our goal of a minimum of 1,000 homes to get matzah for Pesach. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. See you again next week. You should have a wonderful, wonderful, meaningful Passover. There's so much material on our website, koralsprings.chabad.org, where you could learn more and more and more. You could spend until next year Passover learning about Passover. So please share this class. It's good to share good things toward. There's so much garbage, chazarai, out on the internet that just drags us down, that just distracts us. Share words of Torah with your friends. It's a good thing. Have a fantastic week. Thank you.